What happens when the self-proclaimed queen of an HOA decides to push around the wrong neighbor, and that neighbor just happens to be the chief of police? This story is about the kind of justice so sharp and ironic, it'll leave you grinning from ear to ear. Willowbrook Estates looked like it had been ripped right off the cover of a suburban living magazine. Perfect lawns, identical mailboxes, neatly trimmed hedges, and houses painted in approved shades of beige that all blended into one big painting of uniformity. On the surface, it was paradise. But the truth was, Willowbrook wasn't just about community living. It was about control. And that control had a name: Brenda. Brenda had been HOA president for 7 long years, and she wore that title like it was royalty. Clipboard in hand, she strutted through the neighborhood like she owned every square inch. She wasn't just nosy, she was relentless. The kind of person who woke up before dawn to measure your grass with a ruler, then left a note on your door if it dared to grow half an inch too high. She could spot a trash can an inch too far from the curb like a hawk spotting prey from the sky. And she thrived on it. Some neighbors joked that Brenda didn't need caffeine. She got her energy from writing violation notices and dropping them in mailboxes with the precision of a soldier delivering orders. When Marcus and Sarah moved into Willowbrook, they thought they'd found their dream home. Marcus was excited for a fresh start, and Sarah, after a recent job transfer, was looking forward to a quieter neighborhood where she could focus on her demanding career. To them, the manicured lawns and quiet cul-de-sacs seemed perfect. But to Brenda, they were simply new subjects for her kingdom. What Brenda didn't know, what nobody in Willowbrook knew, was that Sarah's job wasn't just a simple transfer. She had just been promoted to chief of police for the entire county, the highest-ranking officer in the area, the one who oversaw every patrol car, every investigation, and every officer's career, including the ones who worked the very streets of Willowbrook Estates. But Sarah wasn't the type to announce her title at block parties. She wasn't one to brag. She focused on her work, stayed professional, and blended into the neighborhood like anyone else. At first, Brenda's antics were small and petty. A note about how their mailbox color didn't quite match the approved shade. A warning about an unsanctioned garden decoration that apparently violated HOA standards. Complaints about the angle of their trash bins on collection day. Marcus tried to stay polite, brushing it off while Sarah mostly ignored it. They figured Brenda was just one of those people who needed to feel important, and it was easier not to fuel her fire. But people like Brenda don't back off when ignored, they escalate. And escalate she did. It all came to a head one Tuesday morning. Sarah was working from home that day, but it wasn't just a normal day at the desk. She had a video conference scheduled with the mayor, the district attorney, and half the city council. The discussion was about an ongoing investigation into organized crime in the county. Serious business, the kind that demanded her undivided attention. She sat in her home office, headset on, surrounded by stacks of case files and notes, fully immersed in her role as the county's top cop. Meanwhile, out on the street, Brenda spotted her opportunity. Clipboard in hand, scowl firmly in place, she marched up to Sarah and Marcus's front door like a soldier on a mission. First came the doorbell. Ding-dong. No answer. Sarah, of course, couldn't exactly pause her meeting with city officials to discuss the height of her rose bushes. Brenda rang again, and again. Then came the pounding on the door, loud, insistent, like she was trying to summon the dead. Still no answer. Sarah was neck-deep in police business, and a knock from Brenda was the least of her concerns. But to Brenda, being ignored was the ultimate insult. Her entitlement kicked into overdrive. In her mind, this wasn't just a neighbor who was busy, this was outright defiance. And Brenda wasn't about to let that slide. So she pulled out her phone, dialed 911, and told the dispatcher there was a suspicious situation at the Johnson residence. She claimed the homeowner was being evasive and refusing to comply with HOA regulations. She framed Sarah as though she were some sort of criminal hiding behind her door. The dispatcher, probably holding back a sigh, had no choice but to send a patrol officer to check things out. After all, when a call comes in, protocol requires a response, even if it sounds ridiculous. Minutes later, a patrol car rolled up to Sarah's house. Out stepped Officer Rodriguez, a man used to handling noise complaints, parking disputes, and the occasional shoplifting case. He likely thought this was just another routine suburban call. He walked up the front steps and knocked on the door. Sarah answered. She was still in her work attire, clearly in the middle of something important. And the second officer Rodriguez saw her, his entire expression changed. His "just another call" look instantly shifted to panic. Because standing in front of him wasn't just any resident. It was his brand new boss. The person who had just been appointed to oversee his entire department. The county's new chief of police. Rodriguez nearly tripped over his words, trying to explain why he was there. Behind him, Brenda hovered, arms folded, smirk plastered across her face like she had already won. She thought this was her big moment, the day she put her new neighbor in her place. Little did she know she was seconds away from the most embarrassing reality check of her life. And that's where the story is about to get very, very good. Because Brenda had no idea that by calling the cops on her neighbor, she had just dragged an officer into the home of the woman who signed his paychecks, ran his department, and now stood staring at him in disbelief. And if you think Brenda's smug attitude survived the next few minutes, you're in for a treat. Officer Rodriguez stood frozen on the doorstep, eyes wide, his jaw almost hitting the ground as he realized exactly whose home he had just been sent to. He hadn't been expecting to find his brand new boss standing there, dressed sharply, headset still in hand from her meeting with the mayor. For a moment he looked like he wanted the earth to swallow him whole. Meanwhile, Brenda hovered behind him, arms folded, a smug little smile tugging at her lips. She had no idea what was going on. In her mind, this was her victory march. She'd made the call, the police had arrived, and now her difficult neighbor would be put in her place. She was practically rehearsing the speech she'd give at the next HOA meeting about how she single-handedly defended community standards. Sarah blinked at the sight of the patrol car outside and then back at the nervous officer in front of her. She could read the panic in his eyes instantly. "Officer Rodriguez, isn't it?" she asked, her voice calm but curious. He swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am. Chief Johnson," he stammered, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Brenda's smile faltered for the first time. "Chief? Did he just say chief?" She glanced between them, confused, but still too proud to admit it. Sarah straightened, her professional side kicking in immediately. "What seems to be the issue, officer?" she asked. Rodriguez shifted nervously. Well, we received a call about a suspicious situation here. Something about a resident refusing to comply and not answering the door." His words tripped over themselves, and sweat began to form at his temples. Sarah raised an eyebrow, her expression calm but sharp. "A suspicious situation? For not answering the door?" Rodriguez winced and nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I realize how it sounds." Behind him, Brenda piped up, seizing her moment to speak. "That's right, I called. She refused to answer me, and in this neighborhood, compliance with HOA rules is not optional. She was clearly hiding something." The audacity was almost comical. Sarah crossed her arms and tilted her head, studying Brenda like she was an exotic creature making strange noises. Brenda, oblivious to the storm she had just walked into, strutted forward a step, clipboard in hand, ready to lay into her neighbor about community standards. "Officer, please step inside," Sarah said smoothly, gesturing for Rodriguez to enter. He hesitated for only a second before obeying, clearly desperate to handle this situation correctly in front of his superior. "And why don't you invite the complainant inside as well?" she added. Brenda took that as her cue, marching in as though she owned the place. She stood tall, her nose slightly lifted, and began flipping through her clipboard. "Now, Sarah, this community has standards, rules, expectations, and when you move in, you agree to them. Ignoring me when I'm at your door is not acceptable behavior in Willowbrook Estates. If everyone did as they pleased, the whole neighborhood would collapse into chaos." Rodriguez glanced at her with an expression somewhere between disbelief and pity, but he kept silent. Sarah let her rant play out for a moment before she finally spoke. "Brenda, was it?" "Yes," Brenda said proudly, clutching her clipboard tighter. Sarah extended her hand, her voice calm but edged with authority. "Well, Brenda, I don't believe we've been properly introduced. My name is Sarah Johnson, I'm your new neighbor. And as of last week, I'm also the chief of police for the county. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Brenda blinked. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. The color drained from her face so quickly it was almost impressive. Her smug posture faltered, and the clipboard she had been gripping so tightly slipped from her hands and clattered to the floor. Rodriguez, trying desperately not to laugh, turned his face away and coughed into his fist. Sarah's expression remained steady, her voice calm and professional, but with an undertone that carried the weight of command. So let me make sure I understand this correctly. You called emergency services because I didn't answer my door while I was on a conference call with the mayor and the district attorney. You wasted the time of an officer who could have been responding to an actual emergency because you felt ignored? Brenda stammered. I was just enforcing the rules. The HOA regulations. Sarah held up a hand, silencing her instantly. Let's be clear. HOA regulations are not enforced through 911. Emergency services are for emergencies, situations that threaten lives, safety, or property, not for a clipboard disagreement. Brenda opened her mouth again, but Sarah's gaze stopped her cold. You've left me with two choices, Sarah continued. Option 1, you apologize to Officer Rodriguez for wasting his time. Apologize to me for your behavior, and we will pretend this never happened. Option 2, I file a formal report against you for misuse of emergency services, harassment, and creating a public disturbance. Those are crimes, Brenda. Crimes with real consequences. Which option sounds better to you? The silence in the room stretched on for a moment. Brenda's face went pale, then red, then pale again. She swallowed hard, her bravado crumbling like sand. I'll apologize, she muttered. Louder, Sarah said firmly. Brenda turned to Officer Rodriguez first. I'm sorry for wasting your time, officer. Her voice cracked. Then she turned back to Sarah. And I apologize to you as well. I didn't mean. Sarah gave a small nod, her calm professionalism never wavering. Good. We'll consider this matter closed, but I trust we won't have this problem again. Brenda shook her head so fast it was almost comical. No, never again. Rodriguez, still fighting back a grin, looked at his boss with newfound admiration. He had just witnessed a masterclass in composure and authority. And Brenda, the once untouchable HOA tyrant, had been reduced to groveling in the middle of Sarah's living room. From that day forward, Brenda never so much as glanced in the Johnsons' direction again. And as word spread through the neighborhood about what had happened behind closed doors, Sarah's reputation grew. She became the legend of Willowbrook, the police chief who calmly, professionally, and flawlessly dismantled the HOA tyrant with nothing but the truth and perfect timing. In the days that followed, Willowbrook Estates felt different. Neighbors who once whispered about Brenda's clipboard patrols now whispered about how she'd been put in her place. For the first time in 7 years, residents walked their dogs or rolled out their trash bins without fear of a surprise citation. Brenda, once the loudest voice in every meeting, became strangely quiet. She still attended the HOA gatherings, but her usual lectures about mailbox paint and lawn lengths vanished. Her eyes would dart nervously toward Sarah whenever topics of enforcement came up, and her clipboard, once her weapon of choice, was rarely seen again. Sarah, however, didn't lord her position over anyone. She remained friendly, approachable, and professional, chatting with neighbors like nothing had happened. But people remembered. They remembered that behind her warm smile was someone who carried real authority, and someone you definitely didn't want to cross without good reason. Marcus couldn't help but laugh at how their lives had changed. What once felt like a looming shadow of constant nitpicking had turned into peace. The Johnsons' mailbox, garden gnome, and rose bushes all remained untouched, and not a single notice appeared on their door again. Even the most power-hungry neighbor thinks twice when the person they're targeting happens to be the county's top cop. Word of the incident spread faster than gossip at a church potluck. New residents were quietly warned, don't mess with the Johnsons. Kids whispered about how Mrs. Johnson was secretly the boss of the police, which wasn't far from the truth. To everyone in Willowbrook, Sarah became more than a neighbor. She became a legend. And Brenda, well, she learned a lesson she'd never forget. Her empire of nitpicking collapsed not because of anger or revenge, but because she let her entitlement blind her to reality. She called the cops on someone who didn't just know the law. She was the law. That kind of karma is so perfect it almost feels scripted. So the next time you think about being that entitled neighbor who abuses authority and calls the cops for something petty, remember Brenda's story. You never know who might be living behind that front door. Because sometimes karma wears a badge, carries a calm smile, and lives right next to you.